Israel's not supposed to be victorious. But in the Muslim mind, because of Dhimmitude, most Muslims are against a two-state solution. And this is precisely why you see this chant, you hear these chants at these rallies saying from the river to the sea. That means eliminate the Jewish state. This is real dangerous stuff when this is interpreted this way. And so this idea of Dhimmitude has real contemporary implications. Hi, my name is Tim Moore, and I want to talk about a subject that I think is important in our contemporary setting, the Qur'an's view of the Jewish people. Now, I'm an academic and also a researcher. I focus on religious studies, and in particular, Islamic studies. As a matter of fact, after my doctorate, I was able to be trained by Shiite scholars in London, where I received a Master of Arts degree in Islamic studies. And so I'm coming with that background. And so I hope we can have a good discussion around this very important matter. Now, my approach to the Quran, particularly its compilation, so this is important to grasp for my overall argument. Okay, there are three different ways to approach the Quran's compilation. One is the traditional view. In the traditional view, there's a Quran that's in heaven. It's communicated to Muhammad via Gabriel, and these revelations take place over a period of 23 years. Okay, there's the critical view, birthed out of critical scholarship, that basically there's a hard and a soft view here. The hard view is you really can't trust any of the history, Islamic history. And so you come with a starting point of having historical documents outside of Islamic history. The soft view is that there are, you can trust some of it, okay? So I don't embrace that. I embrace what I call the Oral-Formulaic view. And why is this important? Well, I think that in the Oral-Formulaic view, that there's a period of 23 years that these ideas were developed, but there's quite a bit of evidence that Muhammad was more like an oral poet, in that he got these revelations, and so he's developing some of these theological ideas as his ministry proceeds. Now, my view of Muhammad in this sense would be probably a little higher than the traditional view. I would see him as an oral poet, maybe on par with Homer. The traditional Islamic view would see Muhammad as simply a conduit of God's revelation. That it's not a manifestation of his own skill set, but rather he's receiving these revelations directly. And so in my view, I don't embrace the idea that the Quran is divinely inspired. And that there's evidence within the Quran that leads me to believe that the Quran isn't a view, sort of the Oral-Formulaic view. In other words, it has formulaic language, it has performance variants, and so on. And all of these point to the idea of orality, okay? And so there's evidence. Well, one of the big piece of evidence, now I'm getting this from a scholar named Andy Bannister, who's done great work on this issue. And he offers an example of the story of Adam and Iblis, which appears 7 times in the Quranic corpus. And so what you have in the story of Adam and Iblis is you have the story mentioned 7 times. Now there's a core to the story on each of these seven times it's mentioned, but the lengths are very different, and it's evident that these ideas are ornamented. In other words, he's adding details as he goes that's relevant to his audience. And so I think that's important to understand as I move forward, that the Quran, I believe, was revealed over a period of 23 years. And I think what happens is you see Muhammad developing his theology, because he's going to use ideas within that culture, okay? He's going to use some of these cultural ideas embedded there. But what I want to do is take that concept and examine the views of the Quran as it pertains to the Jewish people. My argument is that these views change over time, okay? And so let's do that. Now, traditionally, scholars divide the revelations given to Muhammad in 2 different periods. There's the Meccan period and the Median period. And these are 2 places in which the revelations are given. And because there's certain circumstances there, the revelations deal with different things, and I think this is why the ideas change over time. Now, when you look at the Meccan period, the early period, what you find here is the Jews were first used as positive examples of the people of God who had a favored past. They were the ones who received God sent Moses and revelation, and so they had a favored past. But what we see in the second half of the Meccan period, and the Meccan is the earlier period, there's still these positive references, but they also begin referencing the Jews as rejecting the messenger. Now, the idea of the messenger, and that word messenger, and basically the word messenger he's a Rasul, he's a messenger. And a lot of times we think of Muhammad as a prophet. That's not how he's primarily conveyed. He's a messenger. That's a little higher than that we would typically understand as a prophet. So he is. There's favorable statements toward the Jews. However, you can see some frustration coming out during his ministry, as there's reference to Jews as rejecting the messenger, and because Jews are considered to be concealing parts of the scripture and are proud and insolent. But at this time, the Jews are to be left alone. And you see this worked out in Surah 6. Now, when I say Surah 6, that certainly means chapters. Now, most Muslims would recognize, they wouldn't say Surah 6, they would say the name of the chapter, but we have probably a vast audience here, so we can think of as Surah 6. And all of this supports the idea there's a context that there are disputes between Muhammad and the Jews. And we see there's a transition. And here I'm relying and being informed by the work of Mark Durie, the Qur'an and the Biblical Reflections. And after this transition to Medina, remember he starts out in Mecca, he goes into Medina, there's a point where Surah 2, 3, 4, 5, and 61, where they become more critical. The idea of the situation changes, and the attitudes towards the Jews change. Remember that as he is working, as he's going about his ministry, his views begin to change. Now, the Meccan period begins in pre-Islamic Arabia. Before the advent of Islam, around the Arabian Peninsula, what you have is characterized by tribalism and polytheism and different practices that are rooted in paganism. Then Islamic tradition says in 610 CE, when Muhammad was around 40 years old, he received his first revelation from God. And that revelation begins at 610, then goes for about 23 years. When this happens, and he begins to preach his revelations, he receives opposition from the people of Mecca. And so, because he calls the Meccans to accept him as the messenger from Allah and to renounce the idols there. And so what happens is he gets a lot of resistance. He has a small band of followers, probably about 120. Then he goes to Medina. And this, when he goes to Medina, this is called the Hijrah. And the Islamic calendar is based upon that. So the first year of the Islamic calendar is during the Hijrah. Now, when he goes to Medina, his role is expanded, okay, beyond just a religious leader. He's also a political and military leader. And so he's dealing with different tribal conflicts. He's providing guidance for government and leading the defense of Medina against hostile forces. And so he begins to expand now on his teachings as he receives more and more of these revelations. And these revelations cover various aspects: ethics, law, guidance on social and economic issues. And so all of these are recorded there in the Quran. Now, there's this battle of Badr, and the medium Meccan period saw several conflicts between the Muslims and the Christians of Mecca. And this battle of Badr in 624 CE is where the Muslims receive the decisive victory over the Meccans. In Medina, Muhammad's religious movement then gains momentum, and it begins to flourish. He begins to be more powerful. He's taking on more organization and regulating character and so on. So eventually becomes the political and military head of emergent theocracy. Okay, and so that's what we have now. As far as my analysis here, I want to go with an evidence-based analysis of the Quran. And so to do that, I want to prioritize the Quran's concerns and outline a Quranic theology on the subject of its eschatology, and I'll explain this a little later. In other words, what does the Quran have to say, and what is it most concerned with? I think that's important. But I will not stray beyond the text of the Quran itself. I won't appeal to the Hadith or the Sirah or anything like that, but I will prioritize the issues found in the text. And so it's important to understand how the Quran presents information. Much of the material is basically one side of a multi-set of conversations. Allah and the Messenger have this conversation running throughout. And there's also a conversation between Allah and other human beings. And this includes some different people groups, Jews and Christians and associators and hypocrites. Now sometimes he'll start out a passage by addressing like people of the book and so on. And in the traditional way of receiving guidance, you appeal to the Sunnah, and that's the life and teaching of Muhammad. And we find that in the Hadith. And now I won't appeal to that because I'm coming from an evidence-based idea, and there are eternal contradictions in the history and so on. So what I want to do is focus my attention on the Quran. Now, the point of the Quran and these revelations is to have humanity on the right path. And Allah sends messengers to remind and guide the people by reciting Allah's signs. And so people can protect themselves from judgment by following the guidance. And when they receive the guidance, they should repent and turn to Allah's way. If they do that, Allah will show mercy to them. And so this is essentially a lot of the Quran's what it has to teach, okay? Now, what I want to do, and as I said previously, the Quran's compilation is very important. You know, I reject the traditional approach of understanding it, but I embrace the Oral-Formulaic view of the Quran. So as Muhammad is going about his ministry, the views are not static, but rather they're evolving over time. And what I want to focus on is the Quran's evolving eschatology, okay? That has to do with end times and judgment and so on. So what he is doing, he communicates a nearer and a further punishment, okay? So for rejecting Allah, there's punishment in this life and in the life to come, okay, on Judgment Day. For those who tend to surrender and follow Allah, then there's reward and blessing in this life and in the life to come, okay? And so this eschatology develops over a period of time. And we know it talks about all these theological disputes that take place. And the messenger becomes a warner. If you embrace these ideas, you'll receive judgment in this life and the life to come, okay? And so what you have here is that there's continued resistance to the teaching. So the idea of a nearer judgment changes over a period of time. All right, now there's an eschatological transition here. There's a theological shift regarding the nearer punishment. And this is when I refer to the eschatological transition, this is what I'm referring to. So what happens then is these surahs that are in the Quran are classified either as pre-transitional or post-transitional based on theological formulae, okay? So I think what we want to do is distinguish between by theological criteria. Now what happens then is as this near punishment idea develops, there's an eschatological crisis. And there's a point where the crisis peaks. And you can read through Qur'an chapter 22 to get that. That Allah's response to the doubters is no longer to commend patience. Instead, believers are allowed to fight in self-defense. Now, they're not at this point any aggression, but they're able to fight in self-defense, and Allah will help them. Permission is given to those who fight because they have been wrong, and surely Allah can help them. So what happens here is that fighting is a pragmatic necessity, okay? And believers are assured that Allah will reward those who die who are killed by defending themselves. And so He also helps those who take retribution, which is proportional to what they have suffered. And He reassures the believers here that He will pardon and forgive those who fight back to defend themselves. And so this idea begins to emerge that in regards to fighting, but it's not at the level it will be in the future. And so you have this taking place. However, at this point, Allah advises the messenger to stick to the script when they want to hurry the punishment, saying, I'm only a warner for you, okay? So he's not at the point where he's advocating this. As a matter of fact, according to his revelations, his job is only a warner, okay? And then what happens is there's a post-transitional theology developed where the believers are now advancing, and they can fight as an act of God towards those who are not submitting to Allah. And there's believers can take now retribution. It's a valid option. But at some point, patience was still commended as the better course in Quran 16, 126 and 127. But in Quran 2 and Quran 47, we see the Quran graduates to a full-blown post-transitional theology. And I think that's important to understand. Now, that's a lot of background. Now I want to talk about the view of the Jews in the Quran. Now, as I said, early in the Meccan period, which went early in pre-transitional theology in the Quran, you have the Quran talking about the Jews very favorably. The Quran gives positive examples of the people of God who were favored in the past. In the second part of the Meccan verses, while the positive references continue, they also begin to reference the Jews as people who are rejecting the messenger. And so they begin to be accused of concealing parts of the scripture. And they're called proud and insolent. Why? They've rejected the messenger. But it's still in Surah 6 suggested that the Muslims and Jews just be left alone. However, after transitioning to Medina, the comments become toxic. And starting in Surah 2 and continuing in 3, 4, and 5, and 61, you see a different idea emerging. And so I want to give you some verses in particular that you can take a look at. I think in the opening chapter, and it's only a few verses, it's called the Bismillah. And really that's almost like a little short introduction that this is what the Quran is about. And it says in verse 6 and 7, guide us along the straight path, the path of those who have blessed, not those you are displeased with or those who are astray. Now notice there's two categories of people. Those to whom you're displeased with and those who are going astray. Now when you look at some of the Hadith literature, you'll see that that refers to Jews and Christians as different. Who are they displeased with? Christians. Who have went astray? Jews. Now in Quran chapter 560, it says this, say, shall I tell you about the ones whose retribution with Allah is worse than that, which you deem bad? They are those whom Allah has subjected to his curse and his wrath. He has turned some of them into apes and swine or pigs. Those who worship Tagut, it's the Satan the rebel, those who are worse in their situation and far more astray from the straight path. Here it's talking about the Jews when you look at it in context. Now, according to Quran 5 and 82, Jews are rebellious and Christians are not. You will surely find the most bitter towards the believers to be the Jews and polytheists, and the most gracious to be those who call themselves Christian. That is because you are priests and monks among them, and because they are not arrogant. Christians are to be above the Jews until the judgment day. Qur'an 3:55 says, "Remember when Allah said, 'O Jesus, I will take you and raise you up to myself. I will deliver you from those who disbelieve and elevate your followers above the disbelievers until the day of judgment. Then to me you will all return, and I will settle all your disputes.'" Qur'an 2:61. This is my final one. "And remember when you said, 'O Moses, we cannot endure the same meal every day. So just call upon your Lord on your behalf. He will bring forth for us some of what the earth produces with herbs, cucumbers, garlics, lentils, and onions.' Moses scolded them, 'Do you exchange what is better for what is worse? You can go down to any village and you will find what you have asked for.' They were stricken with disgrace and misery, and they invited displeasure of Allah for rejecting Allah's signs and unjustly killing the prophets. This is their fair reward for their disobedience and violations." So, what he's doing here, he's explaining that the Jews were rebellious. Moses scolds them, and he rejects them, and that's their fair reward. Now, that's a lot of different scriptures here. Now, where the rubber really meets the road is this idea of Dhimmitude. I think this has to be explained. As Islam begins to advance out, they expand, and there are Jews and Christians in their midst. And this happens too during Muhammad's lifetime. And this is in the Islamic empires, Jews and Christians were to live in subjection to the Muslims. And this is universal in all schools of Islamic jurisprudence. And so what you have then is an inferiority of these two groups. Now, Dhimmitude was the historical reality in Islamic history. Now, it's not necessarily practiced today, but there are systemic issues today that impact our world that derive from this idea of Dhimmitude. And what it is, it's a system in which non-Muslims, who are known as dhimmis, were granted protected but subordinate status in exchange for payment of a special tax called a jizya. And that they had to adhere to certain restrictions and conditions. They were subject to various types of discrimination, and they had inferior legal status compared with the Jews. And so, while the historical practice has faded away, many Muslim countries have this source of discrimination persist. But when the Jews, who are the losers of history, emerged from their Dhimmitude to assert national rights, it was very difficult for the Islamic world, particularly in the Arab world, to bear this. Because Islamic existence was a violation of the dhimmi system. And things weren't supposed to go that way. Israel's technological and economic achievements further complicated the picture. Early Islamic civilization has been the scientific leader and the creative force in the world. Now, what is going on here? Well, Israel's not supposed to be victorious. But in the Muslim mind, because of Dhimmitude, Most Muslims are against a two-state solution. And this is precisely why you see this chants, you hear these chants at these rallies saying from the river to the sea. That means eliminate the Jewish state. This is real dangerous stuff when this is interpreted this way. And so this idea of Dhimmitude has real contemporary implications. Now, in 1947, there was created, after World War II, there was created a Jewish state and an Arab state. Then in the 1948, surrounding Arab countries attacked Israel. And in 1967, Israel and Syria and Jordan attacked. Then after that, you have this conference in the Sudan that's with all the Arab states. It's the legendary 3 no's. No recognition, no peace, and no negotiation. But Israel continues to work with the people there. In 1978, give the entire Sinai Peninsula back to Egypt in a peace agreement. Now in 2000, we see on the Camp David Accords that there was 95% of the Arabian Peninsula offered to the Palestinians, and that was rejected. What was the response? It was suicide bombers by Arafat and propaganda on Palestinian TV. So the question we should be asking is this: why can't Israel be allowed to exist? Let me encourage you. I would love to dialogue with you, and I would love to hear your opinion on the matter, your evidence-based opinion on the matter. And I think this might engender some good, constructive discussions. Thank you.